I want you to think about your smartphone for a second. You unbox it, you turn it on, and it's just running on those factory default settings.
Right, like the screen brightness is just set dead in the middle.
Exactly. The text is that standard size, and it has that one generic ringtone that makes you check your pocket every time you're in a coffee shop.
Oh, yeah, because literally everyone else has the exact same one.
Right. And I mean, it works, it's safe, and frankly, most of us never really bother to go in and change those settings. But what if you're living your entire life on a factory default?
Man, that is a heavy question.
It really is. Welcome to your custom-tailored deep dive. Today, we're looking at a pretty radical blueprint for overriding those internal settings. We're basing this on the core ideas from a very concise but honestly powerful essay called Why Not Be the Best You Can Be?
Yeah, it's a great piece.
So, okay, let's unpack this because the foundational premise here is it's a heavy one to drop right out of the gate.
It really is.
Yeah.
And, the tone of this whole exploration, it's very calm and reflective, but it absolutely does not pull any punches.
No, not at all.
It demands this, fundamental shift in how we view our daily existence. It starts with this really blunt reality that life is just simply too short for you to be average.
Wow. Yeah.
I mean, it's essentially an argument against sleepwalking through your life.
Right. It's basically saying that if you're just coasting, if you're just accepting the default settings of your daily routine, you are leaving just vast amounts of potential on the table.
Exactly.
So our mission today is to figure out the actual mechanics of personal potential, not just the what, but the how. Like, how do we actually stop living on autopilot?
And I think what's crucial to understand right up front is that this isn't about toxic positivity.
Right. It's not just some influencer screaming at you to be awesome.
Yeah, exactly. It's a highly grounded, super practical look at personal responsibility. The whole argument is that the average default might be incredibly comfortable, but it's ultimately the biggest waste of the cognitive and physical potential you were actually born with.
Which that brings up the ultimate historical baseline the text uses to make this point. Helen Keller.
Oh, yes. Such a powerful example.
Right, because if we're trying to figure out how to escape that gravitational pull of average, looking at Keller's perspective is just a massive wake-up call for you.
Truly.
I mean, here is someone who lived her life entirely deaf and blind, yet she famously viewed life as a daring adventure or nothing at all.
The contrast there is just staggering, isn't it? Because from a psychological standpoint, Keller had every justification, every biological and societal excuse in the book to live an incredibly guarded, small life.
Just to survive.
Yes. The entire world would have completely forgiven her for settling for a baseline existence.
Nobody would have judged her for just staying in her room and letting people take care of her. I mean, nobody.
Exactly. But instead, she actively frames her existence as a daring adventure. And, well, when we apply that philosophy to our own lives, it comes with this really urgent mandate.
Which is?
You only get this one life. Don't waste it. It places the responsibility squarely on your own shoulders.
Now, okay, I have to play devil's advocate here for a second, because I know you, listening to this right now, you might feel a very real tension with this idea.
Sure, yeah.
Is being average really a trap, or is it just, a necessary comfort? We hear terms like inspirational life or daring adventure, and it sounds great on paper.
It does sound great.
But let's be real. Being inspirational on a Tuesday morning when you're stuck in traffic, you spilled hot coffee all over your shirt, and you're navigating a job you only somewhat tolerate? I mean, that sounds exhausting.
It sounds impossible.
Right. Is the argument here that we all need to be climbing mountains or delivering TED Talks every day?
That is such a great pushback, and I think it highlights a massive misconception we have about self-improvement. When we hear daring adventure, our brains immediately picture these high-stakes cinematic moments.
Yeah.
Right. But the underlying mechanics of this philosophy are completely different.
How so?
Well, being inspirational, in the context of your Tuesday morning commute, it isn't about external validation at all. It's about your internal standard.
So it's not about being famous or getting likes on Instagram. It's literally about how you manage the mundane stuff.
Precisely. It's that quiet, relentless refusal to surrender to cynicism or apathy. Let's look at the psychology of the average trap for a second.
Okay, let's do it.
Our brains are literally hardwired to conserve energy. That's just a biological fact.
Right.
The default network in your brain loves routine, even a miserable routine, because it requires fewer calories to execute. It's comfortable.
Wow. Even a miserable routine is preferred by the brain.
Exactly. But the trap of average isn't that you aren't famous. The trap is that dissonance you feel inside when you know you have more to give, but you actively choose the comfort of the couch over the friction of growth.
Ah, the friction of growth. That makes total sense. I mean, if Keller, locked in a world without sight or sound, could override her brain's default settings to declare the day an adventure, it just strips away all the excuses.
It really does.
Suddenly my excuse of, I didn't sleep well or my boss is annoying feels pretty flimsy.
Yeah, it connects your severe physical limitations
Right.
directly to our self-imposed psychological ones.
Mm-hmm.
Staying on the default settings requires zero effort. It's entropy. If you don't actively swim, you drift.
Right. But recognizing that life is an adventure and that we shouldn't just drift, I mean, that's really just step one.
Right, awareness.
An adventure requires a destination and a compass. You can't just step out your front door and yell, I'm on an adventure,
Yeah.
without walking in a specific direction.
Not if you want to actually get anywhere.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So how do we actually start moving? Because the roadmap here moves from the philosophical straight into the highly mechanical.
It does. It tells us exactly how to calibrate our ambitions so we actually take real action rather than just daydreaming about it. And it starts with a very specific directive about fear.
Yes, the instruction in the text is to set that goal that scares you a little bit. And then it immediately follows up with the commands to make the plans and take that first step towards your dreams.
Set that goal that scares you a little bit. I just think that phrasing is incredibly intentional.
Well, here's where it gets really interesting to me. I call this the Goldilocks zone of fear.
Oh, I like that.
Because we constantly hear motivational influencers screaming at us to set massive, impossible goals. Or, if your dreams don't terrify you, they aren't big enough.
Right, the hustle culture mentality.
But this argument pushes back against that completely. It specifically says, just a little bit of fear. Why? Just a little bit. Why not terrify ourselves with these massive goals?
Because terrifying yourself is terrible strategy, like genuinely terrible.
Really?
Yes. If we look at the neuroscience of how our brains process fear, we're dealing with the amygdala, that's the brain's threat detection center. When you set a goal that absolutely terrifies you, deciding you're going to quit your job tomorrow with zero savings to become a full-time artist, your nervous system interprets that as a literal threat to your survival.
Right. And what does the body do when it faces a massive threat? It freezes.
Exactly. The freeze response kicks in hard.
Mm-hmm.
You paralyze yourself, you procrastinate,
Yeah.
and then you retreat right back to the average default because average is safe.
Yeah.
The terrifying goal actually guarantees you won't take action.
It's like lifting weights, right? If
Yeah.
you walk into a gym on day one, load 300 pounds onto the barbell, and try to bench press it, you're going to drop it, crush your chest, and probably never go back to the gym again.
You'd be terrified of the gym.
Right. The fear of that weight is paralyzing. But if you put on just enough weight that it's slightly uncomfortable, you tear the muscle fibers just enough for them to rebuild stronger. It stretches your capacity without crushing you.
That is the perfect analogy. In psychology, there's actually a concept called the Yerkes-Dodson law.
Okay, what's...
It maps arousal or stress against performance.
Mm-hmm.
If you have too little stress, which is the average default, you're bored and you're unmotivated.
Makes sense.
But if you have too much stress, the terrifying goal, you panic and freeze. Peak performance happens right in the middle. That is the goal that scares you a little bit.
So instead of deciding to write an entire novel this weekend, which, let's be honest, will just make you anxious enough to binge watch TV, instead, the slightly scary goal is committing to write one single page and letting a friend read it tonight.
Yes.
There's a risk of mild embarrassment.
Yeah.
You definitely feel the butterflies, but it doesn't trigger a survival panic.
Exactly. And that naturally leads into the very next directive, which is brilliantly mundane.
Make the plans.
Right. Make the plans. It doesn't tell you to manifest the reality or, wait for a magic spark of inspiration. It tells you to sit down and map out the logistics.
Because planning is the actual antidote to fear.
It is.
When you start making a schedule, breaking down the costs, or just writing a simple to-do list, you're forcing your brain to shift blood flow away from the emotional amygdala and into the prefrontal cortex, which is the logical problem-solving part of the brain.
You're literally taking back cognitive control. The fear is mitigated by the structure of the plan.
Yeah.
When you take the abstract, scary idea of living your dreams and break it down into a tiny plan, you realize you don't need to see the whole staircase. You just need to execute step one.
Right.
What is the single slightly uncomfortable thing you need to do at 2 p.m. this afternoon?
It's just going into the settings menu and changing the wallpaper. You aren't rewriting the whole operating system on day one. You're just proving to yourself that the default can actually be changed.
And that proof, that tiny win, builds momentum.
But, okay, here's the catch. Taking that first step isn't done in a vacuum. The moment you start overriding your default settings, you inevitably create friction with the real world.
Oh, absolutely.
Because you live with people, you work with people, and when you change your predictable patterns, the people around you are going to react to that. Which brings us to the final hurdle mentioned in the text.
Right, the social sphere.
Yeah.
Navigating the friction between your own personal growth and the expectations of the people you interact with every single day.
Yeah. And there are two back-to-back concepts here that, at first glance, they look like a massive contradiction.
They do.
We are instructed to go that extra mile for your loved ones, but immediately after, we're hit with this stark warning. Don't let fear of what others might think hold you back.
It's quite a pivot.
Wait, hold on. How do we care deeply enough to go the extra mile for people while remaining completely indifferent to their opinions? Feels like we're being told to do two opposite things.
It looks like a paradox, for sure, but it's actually the key to emotional sustainability. It requires us to become incredibly discerning about our social circles. We really have to differentiate between the inner circle and the outer circle.
Okay, let's break that down. The inner circle being the loved ones.
Yes. The people who genuinely have a stake in your well-being, your family, your true friends, your life partners.
Right.
Personal growth is not about becoming a selfish island. It's not about ignoring your kids or your spouse to blindly chase an ambition.
No.
Part of refusing to be average is demanding that you be the best parent, the best partner, the best friend you can possibly be. That requires that extra mile of patience and effort and real connection.
Because we're really talking about an emotional budget here. You only have so much energy in a day.
Precisely. You have a finite amount of emotional currency. And you should be spending it heavily, generously, on the inner circle.
Right.
But then we look at the outer circle, the others.
The acquaintances, the coworkers, the people you went to high school with 10 years ago who just follow you on social media, the gallery of critics.
Right. And from an evolutionary standpoint, human beings are hardwired to care about the gallery.
Oh, interesting. How so?
Well, we evolved in small tribes where being judged poorly by the others meant being exiled. And being exiled meant starvation. So our brains still react to a weird look from a coworker in a Zoom meeting as if it's a literal life or death threat.
That perfectly explains why the fear of what others think is so incredibly potent. It feels visceral.
But we don't live in hunter-gatherer tribes anymore. What's fascinating and honestly kind of tragic is how often we completely invert the advice we're discussing today.
What do you mean?
Think about it. How often do we spend massive amounts of our emotional currency trying to impress complete strangers? We give our best energy, our most polite smiles, and our deepest concern to managing the opinions of the others.
Oh, wow. And then we come home.
We come home completely depleted, and we give our loved ones the actual inner circle, our leftover, impatient, average energy.
Ouch.
Right. We don't go the extra mile for them. We barely walk an inch because we spend it all worrying about what an acquaintance thought of our presentation at work.
Man, that hits incredibly close to home. We basically bend over backwards so the neighbors don't judge us, but we snap at our spouse because we're tired.
Exactly. And this fear of the outer circle's judgment is the #1 reason people retreat back to the average life.
Because it's easier.
Yeah. You set that slightly scary goal, say you decide to start a podcast, or you want to go back to school in your 40s. Your inner circle will probably support you.
Right.
But what stops you? It's the thought. What will the guys at the office say? What will my extended family think if they see this video online?
It's the fear of being perceived as trying too hard. Because staying average protects you from criticism. If you never try, nobody can ever tell you that you failed. The default setting is basically a shield.
It is a shield, but it's a shield that suffocates you.
Mm-hmm.
True self-improvement requires the logic to actively manage that social energy. You have to actively starve the fear of the critics.
Starve the fear I love.
You have to learn to be entirely unfazed by the judgment of someone whose life you wouldn't even want to trade places with.
That is a phenomenal litmus test right there. If I wouldn't trade lives with that person, why on earth am I letting their hypothetical opinion dictate my reality? Why am I letting them control my settings?
You can't live a daring adventure if you are constantly auditioning for the approval of people who are too scared to go on an adventure themselves.
So what does this all mean? We've journeyed from the factory settings of our smartphones through the psychology of fear all the way to the evolutionary dynamics of our social relationships. If we're synthesizing this roadmap for you right now, it is remarkably grounded.
It really is an entirely actionable philosophy. It's completely stripped of all that usual self-help fluff.
Step 1. Recognize the trap of entropy. Acknowledge that your brain just wants to conserve energy, but life is way too short to just drift on average.
Yeah.
Adopt the Keller perspective. I mean, if someone without sight or sound can frame life as a daring adventure, you can absolutely reframe your own internal standard.
Step 2. Calibrate your ambition. Stop terrifying yourself into paralysis with these massive, impossible leaps. Find your Goldilocks zone. Embrace the goal that scares you just a little bit. Shift your brain from panic to problem solving by making the logical plans and just execute the very first step.
And finally, fix your emotional budget. Go the extra mile, put in the heavy lifting for the inner circle, the people who truly matter to your heart, and ruthlessly cut off funding to the outer circle.
Exactly.
Tune out the noise, the judgment, and that evolutionary trap of caring what the gallery thinks. You have the blueprint. You have the power to override the default.
I think what makes this so impactful is how it demystifies the whole idea of greatness. It's not some genetic lottery. It's a series of manageable, intentional choices. But, before we wrap up, I want to leave you with one final, slightly uncomfortable thought to really mull over.
Oh, I love a little discomfort. It's the friction of growth. Let's hear it.
Building on that urgent warning that you only get this one life, I want you to project yourself forward. Just imagine yourself exactly a decade from now.
10 years.
10 years in the future, looking back at this very day. When you review the choices you're making right now, will you be profoundly relieved that you stayed comfortable, kept your head down, and successfully avoided the judgment of the others? Or will you look back and desperately wish you had embraced that slight, butterfly-inducing fear, mapped out the messy plans, and finally embarked on the adventure you always knew you were capable of?
That is the ultimate question, isn't it? The default factory settings are always going to be there waiting for you. They're easy. But the choice to dive into the menu and actually override them well, that's entirely yours.